Today we're going to be talking about the science of selling. We have the guest speaker, David Hoffeld, with us. David is the author, the best-selling author of The Science of Selling. It's a really interesting book. If you haven't had a chance to read it, we'll talk about how to get access to it at the end of the call today. But it's fascinating because it's really the only sales book that's based on anecdotal analytics and data, and basically data science. It's really quite interesting because there's over 1,000 different scientific research studies inside of the book for sales. And HubSpot named it one of the most highly rated sales books of all time. And it's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that David joins us today, because oftentimes there's a lot of guesswork in the activities that we do and the strategies that we have. And what David does is he takes that guesswork out of the equation and uses actual science and experience to build the ultimate sales strategy. So with that, we'd like to bring David on board and ask just a few questions for him and help us better understand some of the insights that he's gained from his lifelong work. So to start out, David, I'd like to welcome you to the call. And the first question I'd like to understand is, what led you to create this masterpiece? What made you decide to work on this, and how did you end up creating this?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Justin, so much for the opportunity to join you today, and thank you to all those who are listening. What led me to create the science of selling? It goes back many years ago as a sales professional. So I am a practitioner first and foremost. I have been in numerous sales roles as a salesperson, director of sales, sales manager, VP of sales, and I've always tried to improve myself, and I was looking for a sales methodology that was really evidence-based, that wasn't based on someone's experience or what they perceived made a few people successful through surveys or just watching them. I wanted something that I really knew would work. And I was fortunate enough that prior to getting into sales, I had a master's degree in communications. And so I started looking around at different sales methodologies and wasn't able to find any that I thought really had hard evidence that I can verify, that would show clear evidence of causality, that this behavior would produce this result. And so I went back to my academic roots, and I started just out of curiosity to see if there was any kind of information out there about, I was looking specifically on how to deliver more effective sales presentations. And I looked at a few academic journals, and I was just amazed at seeing this through fresh eyes, through the eyes of a sales professional, how I just kept finding data point after data point that was not just relevant to what I did every day, but could potentially transform it, meaning it talked about how certain behaviors would guide people to concede or comply or make a change, and it started describing how the brain forms a buying decision and how the brain perceives high levels of value and why we trust one salesperson and not another. And this wealth, I'm talking decades now of research, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of studies, and I just became obsessed with it. And I started applying it in my own life as what I was doing every day. And I just saw, I was already good. I mean, I was already a top-performing salesperson at this time, but my results went through the roof. And then I was promoted, and I started training our sales team that I was working with to do it. And we became, the company I was working for, one of the fastest-growing companies in the United States on the Inc. 5000 list. And I'm like, there's really something to this. So I began to spend all my free time, my weekends, my evenings, reading academic journals and applying them to selling and conducting tests. And fast forward about 7, 8 years from that point, and I launched my own firm, and I thought, boy, you know what? People need to know about this, that we don't have to guess our way to success anymore, that there is a science. And when we leverage it, not only are we more effective, but we can serve our clients through how we sell. We don't have to wait to serve them till they buy our product or service, but the way we sell matters, and we can do it ethically in non-manipulative ways and really serve our clients. through that by leveraging this science that helps to guide them through the buying journey. And so I became so obsessed with this message, and I saw the impact it was making on those who were embracing it that I was sharing it with, that I had an opportunity to work with Penguin Random House on the book, and they kind of approached us, and we wrote the book and have sent it out, and it was launched in November of 2016, and it's become an international bestseller. It's been translated into different languages, and I get every day, notes, emails from individuals who say it's transformed their career, and some of them, it's actually changed their lives. And it's not so much the book, it's the message of leaning on science for how we sell. So it's exciting.
Well, that's amazing. Now, when I read it, because I've been looking at a lot of different sales books, and this is truly one that has changed the way I think about selling. Because, like you said, too often we rely on our gut and guesswork, and we really don't follow the ultimate best practices. And so I really enjoyed reading the book, and I also like the idea that we really need to help each other. Yeah. That sales is a tool to be an instrument to enable businesses and to help other companies. And our ability to communicate that correctly is really a big part of the economy, which had a huge impact on the companies that you've worked with. Mm-hmm. But out of all of the different discoveries that you've found, and one of the things that you talk a lot about in your book are the misconceptions that a lot of salespeople have today. What would you consider some of the biggest misconceptions in the sales world?
There are a few. I mentioned earlier that I was a top-performing salesperson before I got into this science, but what I found as I got into it was why I was a top performer. And I also found, quite honestly, some things that I was successful in spite of, not because of, that I was conflicting with science. And I think that overall, there's a lot of misconceptions. There was some really interesting research that was published in the Harvard Business Review a couple of years back. They looked at real salespeople on real sales calls, and they analyzed their behavior. Was the behaviors they were engaging in helping them sell, really serving their clients, or was it hindering, getting in the way of the buying decision? And what they found, looking at 800 salespeople on actual sales calls, was 63% of the behaviors the salespeople were engaging in drove down the likelihood of the sale. Only 37% of the behaviors were helping them sell. And so I found that's the biggest misconception. You see, in sales, we've always been told that, it's through trial and error, or we got to mimic another salesperson. So Bob down the hall is selling more than everyone else, so let's just do what Bob does. And I say you can't innovate by looking in the mirror. We can't innovate by mimicry, right? And there's this wealth of science that shows us how our buyers form buying decisions. And so science-based selling, the biggest misconception, I think, about selling is that it has to be focused on us, the seller. It shouldn't be. In other words, when I ask salespeople, why do you sell the way you do, often I get responses like, well, that's how I would want to be sold to if I were a customer, or this is how I feel most comfortable selling, or this is what we've always done. I mean, and we've been successful. I mean, this is what we do. Science-based selling says none of that matters. What matters is, how do my customers form buying decisions? How do they perceive high levels of value? How do I sell the way their brains are literally wired to buy? So it focuses us on our customer, which I would argue, and I think most would agree, is where our focus should be anyway. So it gets this narcissistic view of selling out that I start with me and then I build off of that. Instead, now we look at the science, which discloses how we should view selling through the lens of our customers. And when we do this, what it really does is it allows us to view how we sell in an accurate, predictable, and reproducible way, meaning no longer must we guess our way to success. Today, armed with the scientific data, we can improve anyone's sales performance. So there has never been a more exciting time to be in selling, and this science isn't challenging. It isn't complex. We break it down and make it so simple. And when people leverage it, they instantly become more effective. And as you just said, Justin, and rightly so, you serve, you help your clients. It's this thing you do with them, not to them. And so it's really partnering with the client and understanding their perspective and guiding them on this buying journey to a mutually beneficial outcome.
No, that's a great point. I think all of us would like to see consistent success. And when we have that success, we don't necessarily know where it came from, but we try to imagine that it was because of this or that. Yeah. But trying to take that guesswork out is truly the way to get to that consistent revenue flow. Now, you touched upon this a little bit, but could you tell us what some of the discoveries that you've uncovered throughout your work and throughout your research? What are some of the best practices that you'd like to share with everybody on the call today?
There is quite a few. Some of the biggest breakthroughs, I'd say the two biggest from the book that we put out that have been game changers for many individuals and companies that have leveraged them is first, how our brains form buying decisions. There has been so much research on that, and what the data shows is that there are certain commitments that our brains must make for us to say yes to a sale, to a product or a service. And so when we understand what those commitments are and we guide people in making them throughout the sales process, it helps them form that buying decision, because what the data shows is really exciting, and that is our brains must make these certain commitments. And so once we align how we sell with what the steps, the mental steps the brain must go through, you instantly get more effective, and you can really help your clients make confident buying decisions that they feel good about. A second thing that comes from the book as well is asking questions. Everyone in sales knows questions matter. Nothing new about that. What is challenging is when you say, well, how do you ask good follow-up questions? Because anyone in sales knows it's the follow-up questions where the impact is, because you can walk in with a sales call having some basic questions to me as a jumping off point, but how do you customize your follow-up questions to really serve your buyer and get some of that great information? But you need to customize them on the fly. How do you do that? And what we did was we looked at research on how our brains reveal information. We said, how should you ask questions is the wrong starting question. How do the brains reveal information? And there's a lot of interesting research on that that's been conclusive, that's been proven for over decades now. And so we took that and we made a questioning model that is layered, which means we call them first, second, and third level questions. And what it does, in about an hour of practicing it, we can take someone from a mediocre question asker, so they're weak, relatively so, at asking follow-up questions, and get them to an expert level in an hour. And the way we do it is we just align how they ask questions with how our brains disclose information. Things that you're probably already doing at the last dinner party you went to, you do it naturally. But when we get to sales, we try to ask all these complicated types of questions, and it's so we overcomplicate it. And so we just strip all the nonsense away and just have you ask questions the way the brain reveals information. Makes you so much more effective. And you can ask high-gain follow-up questions that have been proven in studies to boost trust, boost compliance rates, and really help serve your customers by helping them think through some really important information easily. So science-based selling is so easily executed because it's aligned with how we all work anyway. And what this all does is give you a framework, really, for looking at and relating to your potential customers that, as I mentioned earlier, is accurate, reproducible, and very predictable. And so a lot of breakthroughs, but I'd say the two biggest that are in the book are how our brains form buying decisions with commitments, certain commitments, and then how we should ask questions, looking at layered questions, which are quite impactful.
Well, that's great. I know when I read that, it had a huge impact on the way I just communicated with people in general. It definitely changed my style and opened my eyes on so many different levels. And those two examples are just a few. The entire book from start to finish has such life-changing ideas and experiments that it's something you have to read over and over again. I really like the Audible version because I could take it with me. But, that's really amazing. Now, what are some of the things that you're working on today, David? Are you doing any new experiments or any new projects?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're doing ongoing research. That's one thing. We are always leveraging science and doing a number of things. So the book talks a lot about the behaviors of salespeople when selling. How do we leverage science as we behave? We've now gotten into a number of other things as well, because the more you get into the research, the more you see that's so relevant and game-changing. And so we also have got into leadership practices. How do we coach? How do we hire? How do we train salespeople, leveraging this science? We've also got into the qualities and mindsets that enable sales success. We've got into also how the brain learns. A big thing we've really been focusing on for the last 4 years now is how do we get better faster, which is really exciting. How do we tap into how our brains learn? And one of the things we've done, we do ongoing workshops and trainings, but we've also deployed a virtual learning platform that's so exciting because it's the first platform that I know of that has science-based content, but we have structured it to be based on how our brains learn, so we can speed up the learning process, increase cognition and retention, and help people get better faster. So yeah, we're venturing deeper and deeper into applying science to sales, and it's so powerful. And there's so much going on right now in science that's so relevant to what we do. And what kills me is most salespeople just don't know about it, and it's not their fault. It's that so much of what we talk about in sales is anecdotal, and we don't leverage this science because, boy, when we do, it is a game changer. It can transform businesses, careers, and sometimes even lives. So it's so exciting. So there's never been a more exciting time to be in sales because of this scientific data we now have access to, and it's at our fingertips.
Well, that's great. I'm really glad that you've taken the time and really spent a lifetime putting this together. I don't think any of us would be able to really figure this out on our own, and you've done all of that late work for us. It's amazing that we can take a few hours or a day and get through your book and basically consolidate everything that you've achieved throughout your lifetime and be able to apply it to our own lives. It's truly amazing what you've discovered, what you've been able to put together. And I can't imagine trying to execute sales without these types of best practices and trying to just figure it out as we go along. You've done so much work and have had such a big impact on the sales world. I just want to thank you for all of that work. If anybody on the call would like to learn more about what David is working on or get access to some of his books, his website is HoffeldGroup.com. That's HOFFELD group.com. And you'll find lots of great resources and information and links to his books there. But again, thank you, David, for your time today. We're going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. Again, we'll have time for just a few questions, but if you want to jump into the chat feature, you can join there, and we'll ask David any questions that you might have. So Susan is asking, can you give an example of a good sales question?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, Susan, there is. I can do I'll kind of explain it, and then we'll talk about some examples. What the data shows, some of the most impactful questions we call second-level questions. What are they? And then I'll give you some examples. They guide buyers in assessing and explaining kind of introductory responses. So oftentimes when we're in more of a discovery part of the call, it's explanation. And later on, we're presenting value, right? We're doing a sales presentation. It's assessment. Second-level questions are really interesting. They've been through a number of studies, like at Stanford University. They found that when you ask people second-level questions, they're more receptive to a persuasive request. Not only that, there was a study at Harvard University. They hooked individuals up to an fMRI machine that measures brain activity. And really interesting, they found that when you ask these second-level questions, letting people share their opinions, neural activity in the brain associated with reward and pleasure actually increased. So what are some great second-level questions? Now, the questions that ask you to assess or explain something. So, for example, let's say I'm presenting to you. Let's go with an assessment about science-based selling. And we're talking about it, and I describe it to you, and I might say to Susan at the end of this presentation, after she learns about it, I might say, so does it make sense why so many companies are embracing science-based selling? Because it gives you an accurate and really predictable way of interacting with clients. And Susan might say, well, yes, okay. So she affirmed that value, right? That's a second-level question. But what if I want to go one layer deeper? I think Susan's ready now for a commitment. Then I could say to her something like a great follow-up question would be, well, Susan, moving forward with your sales training, would you want to have a scientific basis for it? Yeah, I think I would, right? Now, why am I very likely to get compliance with that question? That I did 2 second-level questions back to back. Let's dissect the first one real quickly. What I did was I asked her, as just off the top of my head, Susan, does it make sense why so many people, I'm leveraging a principle there called social proof, something that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, which connects the persuasiveness of an idea with how other people are responding to it. So does it make sense why so many people, right? And then I talk about my product or service or whatever, or my idea. And Susan says, well, yeah, that makes sense, right? Now when I pose the question to her and say, well, Susan, moving forward, when you want to, now I primed her, I prepared her brain to be able to see high levels of value, which she just affirmed verbally, and then I apply it to her. So those are 2 second-level questions back to back. And the beautiful thing is, once you understand the framework for this, you don't have to memorize magical questions. You can create them on the fly, unique questions that truly meet the context you're in and the client you're dealing with, right? Because what do top salespeople do? They're able to form questions on the fly, right? The client says this, and they can go over here. How do you do that easily, though? You have a framework, right? A framework gives you a lens to look through that helps you interpret the situation rightly and then form these questions. So second-level questions, they are super easy. Assess or explain. Assess or explain. Assess or explain. Right? And so it allows me to dive deeper, uncover information, and get commitments and at least buy into my value propositions. So we say if you're presenting a big value proposition, don't just tell them it. Get them to buy in or at least think through it, right? Because questions help us think through information and then get us to verbally respond. And so second-level questions are what you want to focus on. Then we have a whole chapter on this in the book. And this is the easiest questioning model that I know of out there, and it works because, like you mentioned, Justin, you're already using it on the last dinner party you went to. Once you have the model, it's so impactful, and you can use it very easily because it's how your brain already works.
Yeah, it sounds like what we're trying to do is get the buyer to act and not just be a passive participant in the conversation, but we want them to actually take action, at least inside of their mind, and that's where the sales process really hits the ground running, it sounds like.
Absolutely, yep. You got to remember, buyers need to think through certain value propositions for them to be able to confidently say yes to you. And so what are those propositions? And then I would ask, when you present them, do you just tell them, or do you ask for buy-in? And if your prospects don't understand what you've just said, when you ask a question like that, a second-level question, you'll figure it out. They're like, well, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure I get what you're saying. Okay, I can clarify now. Or if they say, well, no, I disagree, I can find out why and deal with that. And if they say yes, then I can move on. So it allows me to track with them, to know what they're thinking, and really serve them through the process. So it's something, as I mentioned, we don't do to them, we do with and for them. And it guides them through that buying journey and into some of those commitments that they need to make on their own before they'll say yes. And so how much more effective can we be if we're proactive and we're aligning our sales process with their buying process, literally?
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I love inviting the customer to actually participate and to, I think that's how we get them to move forward and take action, is by inviting them through questions to actually participate and think about. Otherwise, it's all passive and there's no action taking place in the mind. We have a few other questions. One from Perry. He's asking how long it would take to implement these strategies. What's the timeline to transform their sales methodologies, I guess you could say.
That's a great question. It depends. It depends on how you do the training. So we work, for example, we work with companies. We'll do like a day of training, as an example, a full day. And the way we train, and just so you know, in case you're going to, if I'm talking to some sales managers or even salespeople who want to improve their performance, how can I train myself to get better faster? We are able to implement this science-backed philosophy, not every part of it, but the foundational pieces that you build on. Usually when we do a training, we'll do it in one day, and then we'll do some virtual learning afterwards to reinforce and then build on that knowledge. But what you want to focus on is two things, okay, real quickly. We want to train and improve the way our brains learn. So how do our brains learn? We're leveraging essentially two parts of the brain. We're leveraging more than that, but two main parts when we learn a sales strategy. Right now, what all of you are doing, hopefully, is we're leveraging our neocortex, right, in the frontal lobes of the brain that deals with cognitive understanding. So as I talk about second-level questions and these ideas, you go, okay, I understand the gist of what he's talking about. Can you now go and use second-level questions on a sales call? Absolutely not. No, you'd fall on your face. So would I when I first was exposed to the idea, right? Even though I created the idea, being able to use it on a real sales call, well, that's different. That involves a whole other part of our brain. The basal ganglia. Basal ganglia deals with execution, taking knowledge and making it a skill. For example, teaching a child to ride a bike. You can take a young child, show him or her where to sit on the bike, how to pedal, how to steer, and they go, got it, neocortex, understand. You put them on the bike, what happens? They fall over. And you go, why? They understand how to do it. Yes, neocortex. Basal ganglia hasn't learned how to take that knowledge and make it a skill. And how do you learn? You learn by doing. You learn by repetition. So what do we do? And what should you do when you train? Getting my book and reading it, great, neocortex, you'll understand. Does that mean you can execute it? No, of course not, right? We have to now practice it. Practice it with feedback. So we'll use case studies where we'll show actual examples that salespeople will be in tomorrow and say, based on what you learned, what would you do? Or, I'm your customer, here's the situation. Ask me a second-level question to uncover this, right? It's going through and trying it out and learning through practice. And so if you adopt that methodology of understanding and then trying to practice execution, and you have some good feedback, you can learn this very quickly, very, very quickly. Like I said, the questioning, I've trained people in 1 hour. And I think I've shaved, in some cases, years, maybe even with some of these individuals, decades of learning, trial and error on their own, trying to figure it out through, failing on sales calls. Because I'm a big believer in what is failure. Failure tells you that something's not right, and it tells you when you adapt, it gives you the combination to success. We fail in practice. I never fail on a sales call. Why? I fail so much in practice. Right? I'm failing constantly. I'm trying to improve in practice. Not on a sales call. On a sales call, when I deploy a strategy, I know it. Why? I've already tried it over and over and over and over again in practice. And I already failed a bunch when no one was looking. So when money's on the line, I don't make mistakes. You can't afford to. So it can be very quickly learned. It does not take long at all. And the reason why is it's aligned with how your brain already works. So the number one response I get from people when they learn this is they go, well, that makes sense. Like, yeah, it just feels right. Right? Have you ever been in that sales training class or working with a colleague and they say a response, maybe to an objection or how to handle a certain situation in sales, and you go, oh, that was good. That was really good, and you write it down? What made that good? What made that good? It was because something inside you said, oh, that'll work. Wow, that's powerful. Why? I would tell you this. It was because it was aligned with certain scientific principles that are wired into us, and when you heard it verbalized, something inside you said that was powerful. That was they were aligning how they're selling with the science of how we buy. And so all of us are doing this on a regular basis, or you wouldn't still be in the profession of sales. The transformation happens when you align your whole sales process, when you align all your behaviors, or the majority of them with what science says, how our brains form buying decisions. And when you do that, everything changes for the better.
So that makes a lot of sense. I think there is that gap between understanding and implementing.
Yeah.
And it's the practice and the doing of what we learn where it actually makes sense and actually is something, a viable, tangent skill set that we can implement. So that's great. I think we're probably going to wrap up for now. We do have a few other questions, but we do want to respect everyone's time, especially David's time. We want to thank him. We've already gone a few minutes over. But if you do have any questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to Untitled directly, and we would be happy to take those for you. And again, thank you, David, so much for joining us today. This has been extremely helpful for everyone.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you to you for hosting this event, and to all those who listened in. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks again. All right, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.